Point Blank is a crime fiction podcast. It may not be suitable for all listeners. We discuss violence in all its forms. The works we reference may include period slang, which some listeners may find offensive. The hosts also have a tendency to swear.
Episode 53, Spy Fiction Reviews. Hello, Point Blank listeners. It's Kurt, and joining me today to do some reviews of spy fiction, it's Justin.
Hello, Kurt. Hello, listeners.
This is a continuation of our last episode, an overview of spy fiction, which, as we discovered, is a huge topic, and we didn't even get really into current spy fiction, but that's okay. It gives us something to do in the future. Today, we're going to look a little bit more in depth at the reviews of some of the books that we read for that episode. This is not going to be every book we read for that episode, but a few of the ones we thought deserved a little bit more discussion into their literary merits. I think we're mostly talking about hits here today. But Justin, do you want to get us started with our first review?
I do, but before that, I want to actually do something a little different. We haven't done one of these in a while, a real stupid mystery. It was one of these little segments we had going for a bit, but it faded away. We ran out of time or energy or whatnot. But one of our, if you join our Patreon and hook us up with some change every month, one of the benefits is that you give us 3 words and we'll take these 3 words and churn them into a real stupid mystery. And one of our comrades, Lawrence de Toma, sent me the following 3 terms to use. And those terms are the following: bluster, agita, and druxy. So he gave us a real head scratcher trying to figure out what these are. For those who don't know, druxy is decayed spots or streaks of whitish color on wood, and agita is a variation on anxiety or aggravation. So I whipped up something here, and I hope you like it, Lawrence. All right, real stupid mystery. Suffering from chronic agita caused by the incessant bluster of his loudmouth partner, Jack Dagson, Private Detective Unc Chuckhold goes for a walk on a foggy night in San Francisco and comes home hours later to his partner's corpse. Who killed Jack? The suspects are numerous, as Jack was a total asshole. Unc can't call the cops, as Jack and Unc were not only PIs but also had a side biz selling sugar for the Sinaloan mob. So Unc takes the case himself, but he's up against a wall with only one clue to guide him: a beam of wood left at the murder scene. So here we go. Finish writing that story, Lawrence.
Wow, that's pretty good, Justin. Those were definitely some challenging words. I mean, I guess if we get another one of these, I'm up for the next one in the future.
Yeah. Listeners, come up with the title for this one. Thank you.
Yes. And if you too would like to challenge us to come up with something like this, you can see that. Go on to Patreon and give us a couple of bucks.
Yeah, throw us a couple of dollars.
Throw challenging words at us.
Trip us up. Make us suffer.
So we'll look forward to that coming out for next year or so?
Yeah, let's hope that he puts that together for us.
Yeah, it does. We stopped doing this really stupid mystery thing because, first of all, it was a bit of a challenge, but then the other thing was I kept going, we'd get some ideas and then I'd go to the bookstore back when you could do that and see something on the shelf that was like, man, this is really close to what we just suggested as a really stupid mystery.
Yeah, I agree. Where life imitates art to a point where we were running out of ideas because they've all been done already, or worse. Ideas ideas too beyond for us. We're already making money, so. Well, maybe one day we'll renew our interest in this, but for now, enjoy that one, and let's move into our reviews.
Yeah, let's talk some spy fiction. Okay, Justin, what do you have up first for us?
So for this spy fiction sequence, I read a lot of books. I'm going to read you the list of books I read, just so that you know, and then I'll focus on 5 that really were meaningful to me. Joseph Conrad's A Secret Agent. Ambler's A Coffin for Dimitrios. Ian Fleming's Moonraker and Dr. No, Graham Greene's The Quiet American and The Third Man, Le Carre's Spy Who Came In From the Cold and Tinker Tailor, Alan Furst's Blood of Gold and Red Gold, Blood of Victory, and Red Gold. Adam Hall's The Quiller Memorandum and the Ninth Directive, and then Len Dayton's Skyhook. Now, the first one I'm going to review is one I mentioned in the previous episode as being one of the greatest gifts that I received diving into the spy fiction, and that's Eric Ambler's A Coffin for Dimitrios. This came out in 1939. So the premise is this. Charles Latimer is an English crime novelist traveling in Istanbul when, by happenstance, he meets a Turkish police inspector named Colonel Haki. Haki reveals to him that a body has just been fished out of the Bosphorus, that of the mysterious Dimitrios, an infamous master criminal, long wanted by the law. Ever gathering material for a new book, Latimer is captivated by the story of Dimitrios and decides to retrace his steps, traveling from Turkey to Greece, Bulgaria, Switzerland, and ultimately to France. The further he goes and the deeper he digs, Latimer has little choice but to face the facts. His own life is on the line. This was a great travel narrative. It's a great tension-filled spy narrative. It has a classic golden age feel of being on a train like the Orient Express, of hopping from border to border, experiencing a variety of cultures and intrigue and mystery. There's just a lot of atmosphere. It has the heft and scope of a classic. It captures a pre-war Europe in all of its grit and grandeur. We have a protagonist that has a deep sense of curiosity and sense of adventure, and we are along with him for the ride. Sure, he's foolish, reckless even, but that's part of the fun. And the ending, which I won't spoil here, works well. It is influential in the same way that Dash Hammett's Red Harvest is influential. Ambler creates the template for a trope in spy fiction that you see again and again. Not only that, but this novel was heavily inspirational to Graham Greene, to John le Carre. They both considered it a classic of espionage fiction, and I look forward to reading much more of Ambler's work. I recommend A Coffin for Dimitrios absolutely to anybody with even the slightest interest in spy fiction.
For me, Justin, I mean, your review sounds great. And, when we discussed it in the previous episode, I think Ambler is probably the author that I came out of that episode being, most inspired to read some more of his work, because it does sound pretty interesting. It's set in a time period I find very interesting. And it sounds like the perspectives that are covered in his work are ones that I would find pretty interesting as well. So it's good to hear that you enjoyed this. I know his name came up in my initial research for the episode, but not somebody I got around to reading. So good to hear that you enjoyed his work so much, because I think I'm going to have to take a look.
Yeah, I feel like he's a guy like B. Travin that people don't talk about them all the time. I didn't know about Ambler much at all, but I feel like he captures history in literary context in a way that's really meaningful and that still feels fresh today. So
glad to hear your B. Travin reference, because I was just thinking about him yesterday, and I really do want to do an episode on B. Travin and perhaps Treasure of the Sierra Madre, because I think it is. That is to me a Western noir, and certainly one of my favorite books. I think
that would be a fun if we were going to do a movie, a book and a film episode at some point. That would be a fun one to do.
Yes, I think we need to put that on the calendar.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So I guess for my first review, I'm going to do these somewhat in chronological order of events that they cover. And that's The Man Who Was Thursday. And I did mention this in the previous episode. I'm going to go just a little bit more into it. I won't spend too much time on this, but this is by G.K. Chesterton. Came out in 1908. And you may be familiar with Chesterton's work as more of a classic British mystery writer, probably most notable right now for being the originator of the character Father Brown, who is, they're still making episodes of Father Brown on the BBC as we speak. This covers that, Red Scare, anarchist scare, whatever you want to call it, at the turn of the century, the late 1800s into the early 1900s, much like The Secret Agent. As I mentioned in the other episode, this is also an influential novel because I think it's one of those things that is something of not necessarily a transitional novel, but a novel that would influence significant writers of the earliest 20th century, including Kafka. And the reason for that is the subtitle of this book is The Man Who Was Thursday, A Nightmare. And it talks about society. It talks about the nature of the state. Those are definitely themes that we'll see in Kafka's work, as well as others in the 20th century. But what this is about, we have a guy, Gabriel Syme, I think that's how you say it. He becomes a secret policeman, and he meets this anarchist in a park, and he gets invited to this secret meeting of the anarchist council. The Europe's Central Anarchist Council is going to be meeting in London. In
Antifa's underground bunker.
Indeed, it is an underground bunker. And it's like the most ridiculous, I mean, if anything about some sort of secretive organization, they're not going to immediately invite some random person you met in a park to a secret meeting where you have your own bunker and your weapons stored, and then immediately invite this person to sit on the council of decision-making.
Security culture, people.
On the very first.
What the hell?
So, it is somewhat ridiculous from the get-go, and that continues throughout this book. But so this our undercover agent, he becomes Thursday, and everybody else on the council is nicknamed for a day of the week, and he very quickly in his infiltration discovers that the very first person he tries to uncover is also a secret policeman trying to do the exact same thing that he is doing. This is why I say you've already heard this novel or seen this story, even if you've never read this book, is what exactly happens through a bunch of misadventures throughout London and France is that he uncovers that every single person sitting on the council is actually a secret policeman trying to infiltrate this anarchist organization.
Typical.
Yes, and it does get to the absolute absurd at one point there. I mean, there's even a hot air balloon chase in this book.
That's pretty cool, actually.
It is. It's almost borderline. It's almost borderline steampunky without being steampunky because it was actually written in this time frame. It is entertaining, and I would recommend it for that purpose. Is that it's like a 200-page book. Once you've read this, you're going to say, "Oh, I see how this has influenced other books within the 20th century's fiction." That's definitely true. I would recommend The Man Who Was Thursday.
Huh. Well, I like the length, and that compels me to give it a go because I know that you said it wasn't like the best of the best of spy fiction, but it sounds like it has enough interesting elements and it speaks to issues to come. So maybe I'll give that a read when I recoup from my latest bombardment of spy fiction reading.
Yeah, and like I said, it is good. It's just not the greatest. But I think it's the kind of book that, like, when you're sometimes sitting in a college course or something like that, you're asked to read something, and you can kind of say, "Well, I understand why I had to read this, but I didn't really love it." It's in that category.
Oh, that's fair. Cool. Well, this is a book that wouldn't fall into that category. It falls into another category of read it if you're in the mood, but I wouldn't call this next book a stone cold classic. This is Ian Fleming's Moonraker. This came out in 1955. I was admittedly surprised by this book. This was the first Bond book I've ever read. I was expecting one thing and I got another thing, and the thing I got was a fucking relief. Let me be clear, if you haven't read this book, but you've seen the movie Moonraker, this novel's almost nothing like the film released in 1977 starring Roger Moore. Essentially, that was just the name that was taken and applied to an entirely different story. The main character is the same Bond, and the main villain's name is the same, Drax, but other than that, whatever. I had never read a James Bond novel, and I suspected that this would be full of men's wish fulfillment, fancy gadgets, hot sex, and heavy drinking. Well, it does have gadgets, but this was actually a well-written and substantial ride that ended on a more literary note than I would have expected. The Bond that's presented here is mild-mannered and somewhat thoughtful, and way less of the superhero caricature that I figured would be present in these books. The antagonist, Hugo Drax, while a bit cartoonish, is a mastermind supervillain who has hidden his true intentions from all of England. He's known in England as like this sort of rock star, sort of like, what's his name? That asshole with the spaceships. in the electric cars? That Tesla asshole?
Elon Musk?
Yeah, he's sort of like Elon Musk. I hope you're not a fan of the show, Elon. But he's got that charisma and sort of that nationalistic pride, and everybody loves him. These sort of techno fetishists who believe that this guy's a savior. That's what Drax is to England in the story. I won't spoil it here, but just let it be known that Drax doesn't exactly have England's best interests in mind, it turns out. It's kind of like Elon Musk. So here's the rest of it that's interesting. The love interest, Gala Brand. Again, this is no pussy galore here. This is a relatively tame name for a woman character in a Bond book, and that was, I guess, refreshing. She's actually not much of a love interest at all. She's a fellow or sister spy. She and Bond have a fairly non-sexual working relationship, and though Bond does desire her, she does not reciprocate. And this is generally accepted by the surprisingly non-rapey Bond. If this were the book, or I'm sorry, a movie, or in particular Moonraker, Bond would have already slept with 3 other women prior to rapily seducing her. So I give Fleming credit for not making me ill in that way. Later, I learned that both Gala and Hugo are unique in their characterization compared with other Fleming novels. This is one of the rare exceptions where Bond doesn't make love to a woman. However, even the other novels, as I've come to learn, there's usually only one love interest per novel, and not the several dozen that there are in the book or in the films. So one semi-flaw in this book is the overlong gambling scene in the first act. Fleming admits to having added this bridge playing scene between Bond and Drax as a way to fluff out the screenplay and make it novel length. And it feels like it. It feels like it goes on, and I think it actually does go on for like 50 pages of one game of poker. And while it's pretty well done, I mean, we know that Fleming likes to gamble. He used to go to the gentlemen's clubs and play a lot of poker and various other games. This scene feels realistic, but I don't think we need to have 50 pages of it. That being said, it's still, I mean, if you like to watch exciting bridge scenes and also like to see or read stories about Bond where he doesn't sleep with a woman for whatever reason, this is the book for you. Fast-paced, satisfying read, and a eye-opening introduction to Ian Fleming, who turns out to be somebody that I will read more of in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned, I think a lot of people who've seen the films and then if they read a book are kind of shocked by the difference. Yeah. I know I was. I would have never read Ian Fleming probably prior to this episode had I not been on a boat one time and been out of reading material, and on the boat's very limited bookshelf, there was an Ian Fleming novel. Uh-huh. And I was like, oh, okay, fine. I'll give it a try. It surprised me. I mean, I was really blown away by what it was compared to what the movies offered. And, it was a very pleasant surprise. And I went on to read a couple more. It is definitely 2 different things. And, I guess that goes to show you that you should, when there's a book and a film or book and a TV show adaptation, it's worth looking at both versions to see which one might be your preference. I know the other one, and the reason I actually read this Ian Fleming novel was because on another boat with a limited library, I was out of stuff, and I ended up reading the novel Lonesome Dove. Yeah. Having only been familiar with the TV show that I thought was something my grandparents watched.
Yeah. The novel's great.
But the book, it is. It's a great novel, Pulitzer Prize winner. Sometimes the original material is definitely worth taking a look at, and definitely in the case of Bond.
And I'll add this, had I not done the spy fiction episode or series with you, I would have watched virtually no Bond, but because all of the Bond collection was available on Hulu over December, I pretty much binge watched tons of them. We were watching them every night. I watched all the Connery ones. I watched half the Moore ones. And then I got cut off because the new year they all left Hulu, and I've been stranded. I've been stranded at Moonraker. So I'm in the worst moment, the deepest dip of like Bond mediocrity. So I look forward to continuing with Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan in the near future.
Yeah, I remember you were saying that you were watching them for basically the first time, and I just found I found that kind of shocking. Like it's almost of people of our general age. I think it's harder. That's almost as shocking as somebody who says I've never seen Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's just so and in some ways harder because it's even more prolific. There's more films, and it seems like, for a long time, those were the things, the random cable television movies that were running at night. So
yeah, I don't know. I'm a weirdo, and I'm a television weirdo, and also I was never drawn to some rich asshole misogynist. I never got a good impression of him. I didn't have anybody who made it available to me, like an older brother or a dad who was into spy fiction or spy.
Sure.
It just never happened. So somehow I missed it. It might be that I spent most of my teenage days just watching Star Wars over and over again, like a total dork. I could have made a little more room for something else, but I didn't.
Now you have, so it's all good. But you got to move on to the better Bonds, and I believe isn't the new Bond going to be a woman?
I did hear that, and I actually did see Casino Royale, the first one with Daniel Craig, and that was actually a great Bond film. I liked To Russia with Love, and I really liked that one, and I thought Goldfinger was good. But I heard that the other Craigs weren't as strong, so I do look forward to seeing. I don't know who the new actor is going to be, but I look forward to seeing where they take the series. They're running out of material. Fleming only wrote 12 novels and like a few short stories, so I'm not sure what they're pulling from.
Well, yeah, but Bond is also one of those characters that's been passed along to about, I think, like 8 different other authors who've written Bond fiction. So
that's true.
It's a franchise, not really Fleming's work anymore.
Yeah, Disney owns Luke Skywalker now, so I understand how that works.
Well, moving on to the next review, and I think I'll keep my review of this relatively short because I think you're going to have some reviews. Would you plan on reviewing some of Alan Furst's work?
I'm going to review one of his Red Gold, yeah.
Well, I'm going to talk about Spies of the Balkans a little bit, and I did touch on this in our episode, spy episode, so I'll keep this relatively brief. But this is one of the later books in his. It's kind of a loose series, really. The series by Alan Furst that starts with Night Soldiers, and there's a whole bunch of them at this point, and they don't really. They have some reoccurring characters, is my understanding. But there's not an overarching story other than the fact that they basically take place in the build up to World War II or during World War II. And this, in Spies of the Balkans, we're basically following a police official named Costa Vanis in Greece, in the port city of Solinka, which I believe has a changed name since then, but whatever, that's not necessarily important. And, here, what's really happening in this novel is we are given a character who knows that the war is coming to Greece. And he's faced with basically the decision is how is he going to react to that decision that, is going to be forced upon him? Is he patriotic to his home country? Yes, he certainly is. Is he a Greek nationalist? Not exactly. Not in the words of how we would use nationalist today. But there's also this period as this at times fast and at times slow roll of the Axis powers are rolling down the Balkans towards Greece, and we find through essentially 3 different set pieces or 3 mini novellas within this larger novel, how Costa is brought into the fold of working for the Allied powers. And, he does this very consciously. He knows he's a person who's going to have to resist the Nazis just by the nature of his character. And this unveils his work as in part in the early stages of smuggling people out of Nazi Germany. At one point, he ends up in Paris because the British intelligence use him at the time, Greece is still neutral. So they have the ability as a member of the Greek government, essentially, to travel a little bit more freely through Europe than, say, someone certainly of the British or other allied powers would be able to do. So, he gets pulled further and further into these actions, and we see that play out. And, really what Furst does best is he really draws you into the time and place. Obviously, we'll never be in Greece in 1940, but by reading this book, I feel a sense of having been there. And I mean, that's the power of the historical fiction writer, is if you can really pull the reader into the time and place well. And I think he certainly does that in this book. If any of the other books in this series really do that, I would highly recommend Alan Furst's work around World War II.
I'm going to dive right in and give y'all my review of an Alan Furst book, and we can maybe chat briefly about him in general after. But I read a couple, but the one I'm going to review is Red Gold. This was the fifth in his spy novel series, and clearly is influenced by John le Carre and the more literary spy novels. This one is set in Paris in 1941. The atmosphere is noirish and bleak. Germany has occupied France, and the resistance, a ragtag group of communists and anti-fascists, has commenced militant attacks on the occupiers. The Parisian Casson, this is a character who recurs in a couple books. Casson is a political filmmaker. This guy gets recruited by Allied intelligence to infiltrate the communists as part of a larger resistance against the fascist occupation. Casson is neither a fascist nor a communist, sort of a middleman, kind of like how Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca didn't play partisan games, at least until the end. But this Casson has no love for Hitler or the Gestapo. He's been burned in the past. He has a history. He's had some losses. So he begins to run guns to the communists. The question is, how does he do this? Is it effective? What if he gets caught? The stakes are high because the fascists are looking for precisely this thing. The atmosphere, once again, is superb. This is exactly what I was looking for. If you were to tell me that Cornell Woolrich was the atmosphere guy, I would expect this kind of vibe from him. I did get that, but it was so goddamn mopey that I couldn't fucking stand his work. I hope to revisit him one day. I don't want to talk about him again until I like him. But this, when I think of atmosphere, this is a book that just is seeping with it. And I love that. And it's really enjoyable. It's as if Casablanca has been brought to life in Paris and in this environment with actual like military intrigue and threat. The protagonist, Casson, leads the way, but this novel does have multiple points of view. We're not always with him. At some points, we're with a guy named Weiss, who is sent to France from communist Lithuania to support the partisan resistance. We also get the point of view of a French partisan, I forgot his name, he's a Jewish radical who had lost his family to the Nazis. We meet him early on in an armored truck heist that goes wrong. He loses the love of his life. This causes him to become calloused and vengeful and sets up his union with Casson to begin the process of running the guns. Unlike the other first book I read, Blood of Victory, Red Gold had a focus and its energy and a consistent atmosphere that made it irresistible to me. I highly recommend this novel in particular, and I hope that several of Furst's other novels carry similar weight. I've heard really good things about the first one in the series called Night Soldiers and a few others, so I'm excited about reading a few of his works. He's another, just like Eric Ambler, Alan Furst is another keeper for me. So I'm glad I got to read him, and I'm glad that you read Spy of the Balkans. That's sitting on my shelf as well, Kurt.
Yeah, and I wouldn't hesitate to read it at all. I'm definitely got two more of his, which I forgot which two I ordered. Probably the first two in the series, but he's definitely going to be an author I revisit.
Cool. Well, who do you have next for us, Kurt?
Next up, Justin, I'm going to talk about The Spy in the Ointment by Donald Westlake. I did touch on this in the last episode as well. But, just to say a little bit more about Westlake's ability to write satire, I think is the key of this review, because I do feel like, as we discussed in the previous episode, Westlake is so prolific and he is well regarded. And I could see that in Point Blank, but I didn't love that book. But in The Spy in the Ointment, I can see a lot more of the versatility of his writing because it's so much more, there's a lot of wittiness to it. And let me just give you the basic rundown of what happens here. And you're going to see some parallels with the book, The Man Who Was Thursday, because we have a guy who he runs. This is taking place basically in the 50s, late 50s. We have our main character is a guy who runs this like peace organization, right? This, nonviolence, no war. And I forget what the acronym for his organization is, but one day he knows he's being surveyed by the FBI. There's some really great stuff on there about how he talks to the FBI through the bugs in his phone. How he's so happy that he has not had to empty his trash in the last 3 years, because every time he goes out and comes back home, his trash can is empty because the FBI has taken it and sorting through it. And like how he runs this organization that supposedly has a bunch of members, but nobody's paid any dues for the last couple of years or whatever. And a lot of that is pretty funny. But anyway, the acronym is very close to another organization that was supposedly much more violent. And a mysterious figure comes to his door and invites him to a meeting. Our main character, he knows like, well, this doesn't sound like a thing I should do. So he kind of gets rid of this guy at his door and goes back about his day. Well, sure enough, the FBI shows up and says, you got to go to this meeting. We need you to infiltrate this meeting. And he's like, well, why am I going to do that? These people sound like violent, crazy people. I don't really want to do that. And he strikes a deal with the FBI. Well, he ends up at this meeting. So the meeting is called by our dark, mysterious figure. And he brings people together, not because of political belief, but because they're all supposedly people who believe in violent action to meet their wants, whatever. So you have like members of basically the KKK and like the Aryan Brotherhood. These isn't the organizations, but that's essentially who they symbolize, sitting in the same room with like the Maoists and the some supposedly militant labor organization and then like the Irish Republican Army and stuff are all sitting in the same room, and he's calling them to action, and that their real plan is going to be to blow up the UN.
Wow.
So it's kind of ridiculous right from the get-go, and it spirals out of control as we find out that our main character's girlfriend, her brother disappeared across the lines during the Korean War, and now he's actually the one being the agent of chaos in this particular situation. And as the infiltration of this organization spirals further and further out of control, much like The Man Who Was Thursday, it just gets more and more ridiculous as things progress. And if on the surface level, it maybe doesn't necessarily sound that interesting, but the way that Westlake handles the pacing and the humor of this particular book speaks to his ability to write that type of book and make it fun. I enjoyed the book. It's definitely a satirical piece that doesn't always work for everybody as both either a writer or a reader. But in the case of Westlake, I think this works pretty good.
Huh. That sounds good. I've read a couple Westlake, and the novel that we reviewed, the one that they made into a movie called Point Blank, was actually called The Hunter. But
Yes.
We will do an episode devoted to Donald Westlake, to his copious catalog, and really give him a good fair shake in the next year or two. I look forward to that because he wrote an incredible amount of books and he has an incredible amount of range. And this is evidence of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Well, my next book is, a classic, Graham Greene's The Quiet American. This came out in 1950-something, prior to the U.S. Is direct major involvement on the ground in Vietnam, but we did have folks there doing intelligence work. This novel, is narrated in the first person by British journalist Thomas Fowler, and the novel depicts the twilight of French colonialism in Vietnam and the dawn of American involvement as the Vietnam War heats up. There is also a love triangle, and in fact this love triangle is sort of like a standing metaphor for the geopolitics. This triangle is between Fowler, an American CIA agent named Pyle and a young Vietnamese woman named Phuong. I really like this novel. I've read Greene before. He's one of the most important authors, white dude authors of the 20th century. Not necessarily crime fiction, but he crosses over clearly into spy fiction, and he's versatile. Had he written a straight crime novel, and he sort of did with The Third Man, I mean, it gets pretty damn close, and what a great film. He's just incredibly versatile, very talented, very heartfelt, and very keen and clear-eyed. At first, it felt like it was only going to be a love triangle drama, and I had a hard time detecting where the spy, espionage aspects were going to kick in. But then the international intrigue did kick in, and yes, the triangle actually served as this meta-commentary about colonial France and the influence of Soviet and Chinese communism, and how Americans sort of insert themselves into situations, sometimes without enough information or awareness, sort of naively, with the best of intentions, at times not realizing or thinking through to the nature of the consequences of their actions. He foresaw a lot of shit that actually came to pass in Vietnam. So this was a pretty prophetic novel. And it's riveting. Graham Greene is an incredibly talented writer. He may not be flashy and evocative in a hard-boiled manner, but his consistent, reserved attention to detail, along with his understanding of human character, is unsurpassed. Like I said, he's a prophet. He wrote about stuff that came to pass, and this novel ends up being a very bitter, very realistic indictment of espionage and the way that nations involve themselves into other people's affairs and fuck things up. So I do recommend it as one of Graham Greene's great works, and enjoy it if you read it.
Yeah, it's really an excellent book. I read that some years ago and enjoyed the heck out
of
it.
Did you watch any of the film versions of it? I think there was the Kane version that came out in like 2000. It actually came out right around 9/11, and they delayed the premiere of it because they thought it was too anti-American, and they wanted just straight patriotism to occupy the screens for that first year after 9/11. So it came out a year later, but it was a pretty solid film. Brendan Fraser and Michael Caine.
Yeah, I did watch it. I don't remember it that well because I think I watched it pretty close to when it came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it hasn't stuck with me.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a great film.
Definitely enjoyed the book.
I would recommend the book over the film.
Next up for me is I believe this is John Le Carre's most recent and probably, I guess, last book. This is Agent Running in the Field. What happens in this is definitely a modern day book, and you'll see that very clearly in a moment. We have Nate, who's basically our main character. He's an older fellow nearing retirement age-ish for Britain's Secret Intelligence Service. He's a big badminton player of all things. I didn't really, think of badminton as a regular sport that much before reading this, but I guess it is.
Why not?
Interesting choice. Yeah, why not? Exactly. I guess when you're on I think this is his like 25th novel. I guess by that point you need to start finding things like badminton to write about.
Sure.
But he ends up with this, Nate is very competitive at badminton. He's like the best guy in his badminton club or whatever. And he finds it hard to find good opponents. Well, through a series of events, he ends up with a younger fellow named Ed, who ends up being a very good opponent. Well, Nate is a little bit more of your old school intelligence guy. But Ed is, young and has, and because this is from Nate's point of view, Ed has a lot of, young person sort of political opinions. He doesn't like the fact that the UK is in the middle of Brexit. He does not like Donald Trump, and he doesn't like his job. He doesn't work for the government, supposedly, or at least that's what he tells Nate. And what progresses here is really, there's a couple of things that Le Carre is commenting on. I think he is still very good at the emotional end of storytelling. But I think as a storyteller in this book, he himself is struggling with some of the same issues that this book struggles with. And that is a shift in generations. It's a shift of how information is shared with the public. I mean, without giving too much away, there is a relationship that develops between Nate and Ed that spirals beyond just that of being badminton partners, and it delves into issues, real life issues, like, say something like Edward Snowden and whistleblowing. And again, like a lot of Le Carre's work, it also gets into the relationship between the relationship between American and British intelligence as well. Now, overall, if I was going to tell you to read a John Le Carre novel, this is not the one I would say to start with. I would go back to his older work. I would tell you to read the Smiley novels, stuff like of that era. Is the quality of Le Carre's writing still here? Yes, but it does get a little preachy at parts, and I think it does, like I said, like the character Nate is struggling with this generational shift, so is Le Carre struggling with the writing for the modern audience with modern themes and modern issues. So if you're a big fan of John Le Carre, then yes, go ahead and read this. If you are not as familiar with his work, read something else first, and then if you want to approach this later on, then I would do that.
Sounds good. I never really had any great intentions of reading Carre's output from the 21st century. Just too busy focusing on the Smiley books, which I have not read in their entirety. So I do look forward to finishing the Smileys, but I'll hold off on this one until I really have some great need. So based on your review, I feel like it's not an essential library book for me.
Yeah, I would say so.
I'm going to conclude here with a duo, two books by Adam Hall. This was another one of these authors that is a surprise, and a refreshing surprise at that. He writes more of a hard-boiled style of crime or spy fiction. I'm going to review the Quiller Memorandum, which was published originally as the Berlin Memorandum, and the Ninth Directive. Both of these came out in the early 1960s. I like a lot about the Quiller series. The first one, the Berlin Memorandum, is set in West Berlin 15 years after the end of World War II. The protagonist is Quiller, a solitary British agent who works for the Bureau, a shadow spy organization based at Whitehall. Quiller works without a gun, without cover, without contacts. Pretty much he's an anti-Bond. He doesn't have gadgets and the privilege and the finances. He reluctantly, however, takes on a neo-Nazi organization. I say reluctant not because he doesn't hate Nazis, he does, but because he was tired and he was at the end of a long stint of work and he was on his way home when he gets the call at the beginning of the novel and gets sent out to Berlin. The reason he agrees to it is part of the reason, I guess his compelling motive is that he just recently had a friend get assassinated. This was a friend in the business that he deeply respected, and this Nazi secret society might have had something to do with it. So this wasn't overlooked or unknown novel. It actually won the Edgar Award in 1965, and rightfully so. There was also a film adaptation that I did not see, starring George Segal, Alec Guinness, Max von Sydow, and Senta Berger. I hope it's good. I'm not sure. I look forward to checking it out. I think somebody on the Facebook Point Blank page mentioned that the Ninth Directive was a real good book, and so I read that one as well. Number 2 in the series came out in 1966. This one features Quiller in Bangkok, Thailand, and he is called upon to stop an assassination attempt against a visiting British dignitary. But before he can get the job done, he realizes that he is bait in an elaborate scheme featuring a Mongolian sharpshooter named Kuo, and a violent and unrelenting game of cat and mouse ensues. I mean, this is a gritty fucking series. This guy gets his ass kicked. He makes mistakes. He's not some kind of superhero. He's not infallible. He makes errors. He thinks through. You get a lot of stream of consciousness and some weird stylistic quirks that Adam Hall, which is a pseudonym, brings to the character. A couple more thoughts about the Quiller series in general. I love the first-person protagonist. I love Quiller's specialist knowledge. I love the transnational settings and intrigue. Sometimes Quiller's narrow escapes are over the top, like I'm not sure how he's even alive at this point. But the plots are savvy, the tone is gritty, and the stories are well written. One writer called Hall's work, quote, literary middle ground between James Bond and John le Carre. this seems fair to me. There is more Bond here than not, but Quiller is far more sober as an agent, and he gets roughed up on the regular and fails as much as he succeeds in a way that Bond tends not to. He is Bond without the arrogance, without the gadgetry, without the pomposity, without the, chauvinism. Also, his superiors refer to him as reliable under torture, and Adam Hall makes sure that we see that. Like I've said in the previous episode, Quiller gets beaten, burned, shot, stabbed. He does not leave any novel unscathed, put it that way. I love, like I said before, Adam Hall's stylized writing. This isn't, straight and narrow Hemingway prose. He uses jump cuts. He uses stream of consciousness. We're in Quiller's head a lot as he's sort of imagining the scenarios about a spy situation and trying to like analyze. And so we get to see like the mind of a spy in a way that's really cool. Nick Jones writes that, quote, Quiller's narrative style with its curiously clipped sentences, his automaton-like reciting and numbering of facts, and his deployment of shorthand phrases like red sector, no-go, so forth, is one of the chief draws. And I agree. I think it's a special thing that is happening here in this series alone. A couple more things. There is something unique here about the way Quiller is presented. Quiller, it's like he transcends gender tropes. He's a unique guy. He's an individual, and we see how he operates and we see who he is on the inside. He's definitely not a stereotype in the way that Bond can sometimes be. Overall, if you're a fan of hard-boiled but haven't found spy fiction that fits the bill, I would suggest Adam Hall. I think this work is essentially what I was hoping to find when I started reading for this episode a few months ago. So if you haven't read Adam Hall, Kurt, check it out. You might be so-so with it. You might love it. I'm not sure, but it's definitely not like a lot of this sort of drier, stiffer prose we've been reading.
That balance, as you said, between the two, sort of between Bond and Le Carre, that does sound like something I would enjoy.
Yeah, I think you would, and I think our readers would as well if you haven't read them already. Just refreshing, and we're a hard-boiled podcast. We're drawn to the hard-boiled. We're drawn to the Hemingway prose. We're drawn to the grit, and sometimes spy fiction doesn't have that. Its scope is too broad. So this was a nice, let's get down to the nitty-gritty, back into the streets, the fist fights in alleyways, and that was refreshing, and a nice transition as we leave spy fiction behind and get back into some old school noir when we revisit one of my favorite authors, Raymond Chandler, next episode when we reread and dissect what is considered by many to be his most important novel, Farewell, My Lovely. I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, and I do have one more review for us today, Justin.
Oh, shit. Yeah, go for it.
This was actually a listener recommendation, and this sort of a modern-day spy piece. And this is Slow Horses by Mick Herron, and this is the first of a rather big series. And it got recommendations from, it was originally recommended by one listener, then another listener piped up and said, hey, that was good. And I enjoyed it. I'm glad I got this recommendation because I have been a little leery around modern day spy fiction. But what I'll kind of keep this brief. But basically, Slow Horses is an allusion to this group of MI5 agents who are sort of put to rest almost. Because they've screwed up for one reason or another. They're given tasks that are considered relatively unpleasant for a, spy agency, monitoring phone calls, looking at email traffic, doing that kind of real basic work. And one of these agents, he discovers a plot of a kid who's kidnapped, and terrorists are supposedly going to behead him on camera, and there turns out to be a lot more to this story than just that. And I'll kind of leave it at that because there are so many twists and turns in this narrative that it really keeps you in for a nice ride. And I really enjoyed Herron's writing, and I thought, it was fast paced. Like I said, great flexibility with the plot, and it, just kind of generally enjoyable for those reasons. And I did just finish this right before recording, so I don't want to get too much into the plot, but I did enjoy it. Definitely Slow Horses is worth a read.
Actually, that was going to be the next. If I had a little more time for the spy fiction, or we were discussing contemporary works, I would have visited Mick Herron's work. I did hear good things about him, and we simply, like we've said, we read up through the 80s and sort of came to a stop at that point because those were all the classic spy fiction authors, and we didn't really discuss contemporary. But I'm glad you read Slow Horses and have good things to say about it, because he's next on my list.
Well, any more spy fiction to cover for today?
I think I'm good. I'm about spy fictioned out. I'm looking forward to something other.
Yeah. Well, let me give one quick recommendation here. And I know I'm way behind the times on this, but I have finally gotten around to watching Longmire on Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
And have you watched Longmire, Justin?
Yeah, I've seen the whole series. I mean, it was filmed. It was filmed here in New Mexico.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I'm enjoying it. I'm on season 5 right now. If you haven't, for some reason, watched this, and you're like me, you've just, I don't know, been in some kind of TV cocoon, I highly recommend it. I think it definitely, there's it's not perfect, but it definitely has a Western noir feeling to it, especially by the time you get to about season 3, it starts to get a little less police procedural and a little bit more overarching noirish story to it. And I think one of the things it does very well, and very few programs on television do this, is it really touches on Native American issues, and a lot of stories focus on the Cheyenne reservation. That is it's a key part of the story, and a diversity of Native American characters. So a lot of interesting stories that you're not really going to see in other places from Longmire. So I recommend it. I'm curious to check out the novels as well.
I agree with you about the recommendation and about the primacy it gives Native American issues. It's not background; it's key elements of the plot and key characters. So that very good stuff. I did read one of his books, and it was good. I don't know. I'd have to read a couple more to see if they're the kind of books that would spark something in me. But sure. They're pretty police procedural, pretty straightforward mystery books. But I like the setting. So and Longmire's a pretty solid character. He's a pretty thoughtful guy.
Yeah, it is ultimately a series that is less about the law and more about justice when it's all said and done.
Yeah, well said.
Anyway, we will see you next time for our discussion going back to the classics of Raymond Chandler, and I'm looking forward to it.
Hell yeah. And then after that, that's episode 54. Episode 55, we're going to do S.A. Cosby's Blacktop Wasteland, which is a great contemporary story. It came out last year. A lot of acclaim, rightfully so. We'll talk about it. Episode 56, we're going to do another subject unknown, this time on tartan noir. So we're going to go to Scotland, delve into some stuff that I don't know shit about. So Chris is going to have to give me some recommendations, and that should be a fun little getaway as we circle around into the middle of the year, 2021. Maybe we'll be free from the pandemic then. We'll see.
Hopefully so. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can find us on Facebook, Point Blank Hardboiled Noir and Detective Fiction. There is also a Point Blank discussion group on Facebook. I think that's getting the most traffic right now as far as listeners talking about different elements of crime fiction. We also have a Goodreads group. You can go to Goodreads and search for Point Blank. Find us there. If you have a specific question or want to get in touch with Justin or myself, the best way to do that is through email, pointblanknoir@gmail.com. Oh, if you would like to leave a review for the show, please do so on iTunes. It does really help. We're also on YouTube if you wish to listen to us there for some reason.
We do love your comments. We love when you reach out. We love when you ask hard questions. We love engaging in conversations about hard-boiled noir detective fiction. This is good stuff. It's fun. It's fun to be in this world, and it's fun to share it with y'all. So yeah, please do reach out. We like the interaction. We value it. So until next time, stay safe and stay sane and be good to each other.
Bye-bye.
Point Blank is under a Creative Commons license. Music is by Justin. Copywritten works are property of their respective holders.